actually can't stop me because I have the mic. I'm going to offer a couple of more suggestions. Stop trying to please people wearing robes. It is not your job. Respectfully, you will, in my judgment, ultimately fail in what you seek to accomplish if it's your wrongly conceived strategic plan to make the court pleased and smiley about your positions and actions. I'm not talking about pleased with your excellent work designed to enable best judicial decision-making. I am talking about taking positions that you might not otherwise take on the merits, but are convinced the court expects from you or wants you to take. If you measure how often the court agrees with your recommendations, as many programs do, what do you do with the results of that inquiry? Is it necessarily good if the court's agreeing? Is it necessarily bad if it doesn't agree with you? Can we all agree that there's no intrinsic value in courts and pretrial service being in agreement? If one or the other of us, for example, is doing less than best practice work, why is agreement a positive indicator of success? If there's any value to measuring concurrence, it's in service of a more directly important goal, discerning just why there is agreement or disagreement and what it signifies. So a quick little story. I learned that last year there was a recurring category of people in D.C. for whom the D.C. Pretrial Service Agency was taking the position in its recommendations to the court that there were no conditions that they could recommend that would give the court a reasonable assurance of safety or return. The court, however, a new bail-setting judge, who I trained, decided that that didn't seem right to her, and she just began disregarding for that category of cases because, again, I'm sorry to say, her judicial hunch, which I don't endorse, her judicial hunch told her that can't be true. And so she set some conditions and overrode their recommendation and released this class of people for a year. And lo and behold, pretrial, who of course does pay attention to what happens and to the level of agreement or disagreement, noticed this, but far more significantly, they noticed that these people were all doing very well. And that was very significant for D.C. pretrial. They immediately took note of it and completely reassessed what was leading them to what was obviously a wrong set of recommendations for that class of people. So my message in this area is, it's not obvious, telling the court what you think the court wants to hear will, in my view, undermine rather than enhance your effectiveness. And there should never be a time, and I hear this so much from pretrial people who are trying to do their best work with tyrannical judges, they say, as if I ought to understand this, that we have to pick our battles with this judge. I caution you, of all the slippery slopes, that is a slippery slope. Stay off it. In the architecture of any sound pretrial justice system, you're there to give the court your best information and your best advice as a pretrial service professional. You are not the court's intellectual valet. If you're taking doctrinally sound positions, it's part of your challenge to make your voice heard. Everybody must learn to speak the truth to judges, not to achieve harmony, but to achieve best practice decision-making by the court. My parents were both progressive Protestant ministers, and an important part of their job, they described to us as kids, was being able to successfully comfort the troubled and trouble the comfortable. And I submit to you, in your work with judges, muster the courage to avoid the fear to trouble the comfortable. A critical subset of what I'm submitting to you is the undesirable practice of trying to please the court is recommending money bonds. I'm talking about state courts here, obviously. I have visited many places this year where I've watched in the courtroom as pretrial service representatives recommend secured money bonds, sometimes recommending money in specific dollar amounts. I have even visited places where risk assessment scores are tied on a grid to fixed amounts of money bond that pretrial services then recommends to the court. Your Honor, defendants are risk level 2. Therefore, we believe $2,500 secured bond is appropriate. I watch this and I ask, why are you doing that? And the answer is some variant on a set of recurring themes. That's the way the courtroom works, Judge Morrison, here. That's the way we've always done it. And we don't do it in every case. And that's what the judge expects from us. Although we often disagree, we have to pick our battles. And everyone else, by the way, is recommending money amounts. Please, 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 please. Nobody needs your voice in the money bond choir. The choir will always be singing the wrong tune without you trying to sing harmony. And ask yourselves, is this a game we really want to play? And by the way, of course I know the answer to this question, do you have any skills that actually help you spin the bail dollar amount roulette wheel? I'm here to tell you judges have no such skills, and I'd be very interested in knowing where you think you might have gotten yours. The very act of lending your impartial, informed recommendation to recommendations of cash implicitly sanctifies the ongoing perversion of secured money bonds in a justice system. Stop wasting your intellectual energy pretending you can pick random dollar amounts and spend that energy instead on creative strategies to get the court to consider releasing the great bulk of people who should be getting out. It's harder work, but doing your level best to keep in jail only those who actually belong there, it is my submission, is the distilled essence of your calling as pretrial service professionals. So moving on from bad practice purges, and I'm nearing the end, I promise. I know your drinks await. Another potential facet of pretrial service leadership involves an important courtroom word, advocacy. Know that the American courtroom is not actually a place where people were intended to gather to hear wise judicial pronouncements. It is by its very design to be a place where people with differing positions on contested issues argue the merits of their positions. They advocate for their positions. The implicit premise of our adversarial system in America is that from such interplay of competing views, the people charged with making decisions, judges, juries, will be better able to find the truth, or truth, schmooth, more modestly, the better position, and then make the correct decision. You might rightly be thinking, Judge Morrison, we are not advocates for any side in the bail-setting courtroom, right? Neither the prosecutor nor the defense attorney nor her client, the accused person, are our clients. You are right. You are to be impartial. Your perceived and actual impartiality is critical every day to your credibility in your courthouse. But feel strongly about this. I feel strong about everything I'm saying, obviously. I don't know why I paused to say that. I argue to you that impartiality doesn't mean that you have nothing to say about what judges should be deciding. Impartiality, importantly, doesn't mean neutrality. To say you're impartial or nonpartisan doesn't mean you have no ideas or positions. If your best information tells you that a non-financial condition of release will indeed give the court a reasonable assurance of safety in return, how can you be neutral on the issue of whether the court imposes a secured money bond? Make your position known, not to support the accused person's hopes for release, but because your information is that that's the correct bail decision. If your information indicates the appropriateness of release, recommend non-financial conditions as intelligently and persuasively as you can. On the other hand, in the rare case where your information indicates there are no conditions that will reasonably assure safety in return, sorry as you are to say it, simply say that. It's not your job, after all, to recommend release for everybody. You could say, we're just simply unable to make a recommendation for release in this case, Your Honor. The judge may have no practical choice but to order what she hopes will be a disabling secured money bond, something the law, I wish I had time to discuss with you, actually doesn't permit. And so, because she probably senses that her order is not truly legally supportable, she'd like your help, undoubtedly. But that doesn't mean you have to give it. Stay true to your informed understanding of what's right. Remember that any bail setting decision inexorably always takes place within a legal framework, a framework that the court, by its very oath, is not free to ignore. If the law says that before setting a financial condition of release, the court must consider other factors, you should be informed, you should be aware of that legal context, and make your recommendations in light of that legal context. I submit to you, this is not the easiest thing in the world to do, and you have to get help, usually, but I don't believe that pretrial service professionals can be effective and play their leadership role without a basic understanding of your bail law, wherever it is you work. And if necessary, you need to have classes on a regular basis for your staff, so that I don't mean you have to become experts in all the nuances of case law. You just need to know what the most important commands of your bail law are. Let me add, although reasonable people disagree about this, and I just learned much to my surprise that somebody I respect very much for reasons related to the federal system, which we're going to talk about in a minute, differs with me about this. But my view is, if you've not been making recommendations, either verbally in writing or in writing, why exactly is that? Assuming you have quality information to support a recommendation, why is pretrial services silent while everybody else advocates for a result? I think you should discuss with your chief judge the appropriateness of furnishing recommendations. There's ample precedent around the country for pretrial programs to make recommendations. And if the court trusts the integrity of your information, which is, of course, your daily goal to have that be the case, then most judges would appreciate having the application of that information in the form of a recommendation. Let me give you an example that may surprise you. In the District of Columbia, we have this elaborate, state-of-the-art, wonderful pretrial risk assessment. No judge has the vaguest idea of what it is, how it reads. We've never seen it. We've never laid eyes on it. We never get scores. We never get told high, low, medium, ultra high, ultra low, nothing. What we know is that the D.C. Pretrial Service Agency brokers the findings of that risk assessment into their recommendations to me about what I should do in deciding release or detention. And I'm thrilled to have that be the way it is. And so are all of my colleagues. Tell the court what it actually needs to hear, what you believe the truth to be, even if you fear that may not be precisely what the court wants to hear. A couple of other leadership ideas and examples, and I'll finish here. I had planned to tell you some tales of accomplishments from the 50th anniversary of the D.C. Pretrial Service Agency. I'm running out of time. So I urge you to consider going to the PJI website and typing into the search line. The PJI website, by the way, is, I'm sure you all know, a wonderful mother lode of information at your fingertips about this field. Type into the search line DC pretrial case study. Counterintuitively, take out the period after D and the period after C, or you get nowhere. But if you do it right, up comes a really rich report of the history of DC pretrial and its concurrent leadership in the history of changing the face of justice in my courthouse. So, you know, the bail bondsmen have a stock presentation in legislatures around the country that are considering pretrial services, and they rolled it out in New Jersey. Basically, their premise is that if you want to have pretrial services and you have all the money in the world and you don't mind risking bankruptcy, then follow the pretrial services example in D.C. Well, that's a bunch of junk, because to be sure, D.C. pretrial enjoys a lot of resources right now. They largely came about because our whole court system was federalized in the year 2000. But long before the year 2000, the D.C. Pretrial Service Agency had established its reputation locally and nationally for innovation, leadership, and excellence. And D.C. pretrial story, the reason I'm batting my gums about this, is that I submit to you that if you begin to study it, it has lessons of broad application for pretrial service efforts everywhere. Just to tick off a few things, that I won't even talk about them, but that D.C. pretrial has tried to exemplify down through the years. A constant daily focus, remembering the mission and the vision of the agency. Having a reformer mentality as part of the organizational culture of D.C. pretrial. To empower staff through a always continuing learning environment, making the collection, analysis, and distribution of reliable data an always top priority, and recognizing the critically essential importance of consultation and collaboration with other people in the justice system. I have to tell you one story, I'll do it in 2 minutes, that is because it is so fundamentally critical. In the 70s and the 80s, I was a lawyer experiencing this firsthand in the 70s, my courthouse was a typically dysfunctional, bondsman-infested showplace for monetized decision-making in criminal cases of any seriousness. We had a preventive detention statute. Congress gave us one. We're not a right to bail state, thank God, and America is not a right to bail country. The Eighth Amendment does not guarantee a right to bail, guarantees a right to no excessive bail. Anyway, we had a preventive detention statute for the past 50 years. It was never used. And although money bond by judges for community safety was, from the first day our court opened its doors, expressly outlawed in D.C., could not be done. That law was ignored every day of the week. We are now, forgive my pride and immodesty, the closest thing we have in the United States to a model pretrial justice system. We're the only state court in America that doesn't use money bond, the only one. And as you heard me say on John Oliver, tonight as the sun sets over our half empty jail that operated under federal court overcrowding orders for 30 years. As the sun sets on that half-empty jail tonight, there's not a single woman or man sitting in a cage because she or he cannot pay their money bond. Not a single person. And this matters because of a really important statistic. We release 90% of the people that we arrest. 90%. And last year, about 88% came back, and about 87% remained arrest-free. How did we manage to change so dramatically and permanently? The short, slightly oversimplified story, but essence, is through the leadership of the D.C. Pretrial Service Agency and its former director, one-time NAPSA president, Jay Carver. Jay Carver, in careful collaboration with the prosecutor in Washington and the public defender in Washington, went to our city council, persuaded them to borrow from the U.S. Code, a provision that's been operative in federal courts for 50 years, that completely transformed bail setting in the District of Columbia. That one sentence, which we would have never had but for D.C. pretrial and Jay Carver, reads that a judge may impose a financial condition of release as long as it does not result in the detention of the person. So all of a sudden, in Washington, you had a right to a money bond you could meet. And if you couldn't, it had to be modified. So we're a poor people's criminal court, like every criminal court in America. The consumers are poor people. And we quickly realized that any money bond that we had been setting to supposedly give the person a stake or some skin in the game or all this silliness was quickly beyond the reach of almost all accused people. We realized we just couldn't use money bonds anymore for almost everybody. And now we don't use them for anybody. So we turned to this pretrial detention statute that was happily on the books and started using it for the very few people that were too dangerous to release. And we turned to D.C. pretrial, which thank God had the capacity and the willingness, and said, you know, all these people we've been stashing in the jail on money bonds all these decades, you've got to figure out a way to safely and effectively manage them in the community. And they stepped forward, and they did. So, I want to turn to one last observation about pretrial service and how it's working in America and other courts and how they're working in America. And I'm sorry to say this is not such a happy story. Since it's clear that using money bond for community safety, we haven't had time to really talk about this, but it's so straightforward. Let me just say this long sentence. Money bond for community safety is either a joke, completely stupid, because nobody gets safer by leaving us cash at the exit door, or it's actually not legally permissible. Judges in America cannot use bail to immobilize people. That is not the way the Supreme Court authorized to preventively detain people. So, since it's clear that using money bond for community safety doesn't work, people ask me as I travel around the country, why on earth haven't more jurisdictions turned to preventive detention as the obvious law-based, no guesswork way for judges to deal with very high-risk people? One reason I've mentioned is the problem with state constitutions that we're working on. But separately, there's civil liberties issues that trouble many people related to preventive detention. Notwithstanding the Salerno case in the Supreme Court expressly authorizing the constitutionality of preventive detention if done right, many people are troubled by the very concept of locking up presumptively innocent people pre-trial. To me, give me 10 minutes with those people. There are so many arguments related to what's going on now with the money bond system of locking up presumptively innocent people. But additionally, now I'm getting to the point, many people are understandably concerned, and I know this is true in New Jersey and in New Mexico, about to implement preventive detention. They are understandably concerned about whether preventive detention powers, when judges have them, will remain properly limited or will result in widespread detention. I actually very much share those concerns, despite the fact that I travel the country advocating preventive detention. The District of Columbia, the only state jurisdiction in the land that uses preventive detention every day, has shown over time that we can keep it properly limited. We have never preventively detained more than 15% of the people that we arrest. Tragically, the same cannot be said of the only other court system in America regularly using preventive detention, our federal court system. Last year, controlling for immigration-related cases, excluding immigration cases, 57% of all arrested people were preventively detained and never released prior to trial. And for the purpose of this gathering in NAPSA, respectfully, I am especially troubled by the fact that excluding immigration cases, federal pretrial service programs nationwide in America recommended detention 55% of the time. 55%. U.S. attorneys in those courthouses recommended preventive detention only 7% more frequently. And all the more surprising that statistic nationwide is because, so let me go ahead and add that there are many federal pretrial programs that actually, in my view, do worse than that. They recommend detention prior to trial for 2/3 of all arrested persons, and one federal pretrial program, remarkably in my view, recommended detention until trial for 80% of all arrested people. This is in non-immigration cases. The numbers would blow your mind if we factored in immigration-related cases. There are places that recommend it 97% of the time if we do that. So here's the point. People say to me, when I say you've got to have preventive detention to do away with money, why would we ever want to end up like the federal system? At least we may have some theoretic chance of defendants returning home with the bondsman. We may just stick with the bondsman. In my opinion, I'm sorry to say, pretrial decision-making outcomes in the federal court system are presently a direct obstacle to bail reform in America. I have long advocated a careful study of federal court outcomes. We have to learn why pretrial detention rather than release is the national norm in the federal court system. They use the same law, essentially, that I do in D.C., where we preventively detain 10% of the people. And it is striking, I have told you the troubling part, it is striking that using the same law and all over the country, not just in one little place where somebody could make the argument, oh, that's their cases in the Middle District of Georgia. You might be surprised to learn, I shouldn't say that because there might be people in Georgia who wouldn't view it surprising in the least. And it shouldn't, I shouldn't have said that. I'm a Southerner, actually, so forgive me. But the leading, in my view, federal pretrial service program has year in and year out been the Middle District of Georgia, who never recommends preventive detention for more than 25% of the people. And there are pretrial service programs in federal courts all across the country, like New Jersey and elsewhere, that recommend 30, 31% of detention, while the national average is well above 50%. All right, I will close. There are meaningful and lasting pretrial reform agendas before us that we can accomplish only with pretrial services leadership. You must help us think how to completely change the way we think about justice prior to trial. There are so many things that you can do to lead change. You must help us embrace an in or out bail setting dynamic where judges' orders mean what they say and say what they mean, orders that issue after open, transparent, and honest discussion of the real issues on the record, orders that issue free of the corrupting influence of profit-taking and commerce, needing no bondsman's agreement to take effect, orders that issue after law-based consideration of someone's risk and our ability to manage it, not the accident of wealth or poverty. For judges to make rational law-based decisions, you, America's pretrial service professionals, must continue to see to it that we have the highest quality information possible at our fingertips. And you must also help us understand how to wisely use that information. You have to find ways to effectively share with us what you know about risk and its lawful mitigation potential through informed recommendations. Everywhere, pretrial service professionals must do something simple but radically important, and that is to create locally effective means to just notify people of their court dates. And then I suggest, additionally, immediately contact people who miss them. For many, if not all, low-risk people, that service alone done properly may be all we need to render. For people presenting more challenging risk issues, you must continually struggle to be on top of what current research teaches us about successful supervision strategies. And always, as you deploy them, accurately measure their success. If you can or have the ability to develop resources, be prepared to assist the court in marshaling, facilitating access to, or providing supportive treatment and other direct services if and only if they are actually essential to furnishing a reasonable assurance of safety or return for a particular accused person. We must all dare to once and for all say goodbye to cash-driven dynamics of decisions about people's liberty. We must refuse to accept any longer as our social reality that it is normal that money, rather than risk, determines whether people sit in cages or with their families at home prior to trial. Judges must make decisions about pretrial liberty that finally begin to make good sense, that are smart, law-based, and fair. 30 more seconds. Fair. Do not be afraid to help us remember fair. Justice is about fairness. Pretrial justice policy experts talk in serious adult tones about community safety, efficiency, cost savings. We should never be embarrassed to speak the word fairness in the same sentence as the word justice. Fairness is not some soft, theoretic aspiration. It is the beating heart of the 14th Amendment. and the one word that captures what we Americans mean when we say justice. Any policy or practice that is unfair, by that measure alone, is unjust. Justice without fairness is no justice at all. It's not a side issue. Always think of justice, of fairness, as an essential, final measure of any policy or practice. In the tragically limited number of jurisdictions where pretrial service agencies or programs exist in any form, judges desperately need pretrial service help. Please understand how important it is that you keep trying to do your best work, because only if you do can we judges hope to do ours. It is my prayer that working tirelessly together, each contributing what we can, we might soon hope to lift our eyes and see the day when real pretrial justice begins to become a reality for all of America, not just an aspirational slogan. Thank you for listening. Now I assume they're free to go drink, right?
A great start to our conference. Thank you all. There is a reception with food and drink, which I know everyone is anxiously awaiting, outside the doors and to the right, so please go and enjoy.
Get out of this chair.
I know. It was a little too, no, thank you.